Welcome to the 12th District. This is your recovering politician, Kerry Condata, bringing you the news from Olympia and around the world. Well, we are in the midst of the session, just past the center point, and the budgets have dropped from the House side. We actually have one budget from the Senate side, the capital budget, which we will talk about with our legislators. And this is all coming to a head with a budget, projection of 19% increase, $1.4 billion in new taxes. It's a pretty unbelievable number, $53 billion. We're going to break that down for you when we come back, and then we'll get with our legislators and see exactly what they think of these budgets. We'll be right back with the 12th District. All right, welcome back. We're going to dig into this budget and take a little closer look at it, but we want to take a short review of some of the national stories we have been following. Chinese trade talks resumed and will continue through April, as we understand it, until some conclusion is reached. President Donald Trump is scheduled to go overseas and meet with the Chinese leaders at some point in April. This will be welcome news. I think it's one of the most important national stories for our area, for the 12th District, and of course the agricultural trade issue is all, we're coming into season and that needs to be resolved. Brexit, by the time you see this, there may be more happening. There was a major vote scheduled at the time we were filming this show, and the fact is we don't know what the outcome is, but it is a real mess over in Britain. We're going to continue to follow that and see what happens. We have hit the deadline, and we're just not sure what the outcome is going to be. Venezuela continues to deteriorate with the economy coming to a basic stop. The currency is worth nothing, and now power outages are all over the major cities, making commerce just about impossible to do. Maduro, certainly you would think his time is limited, but now the Russians have moved in and are supporting him. There have been a number of plane loads of troops and other materials propping up Maduro. We'll keep an eye on that one as well. All right, let's go to the budget. I think it's important that we put in perspective this budget numbers, because if you look at a little bit of history on that budget, it's pretty startling. Let's go back to 1985. I think it's important to do the perspective. In 1985, the state budget was, are you ready? $8 billion. That's right. That's the entire state budget was run on $8 billion. And that's 1985. That was not 1955 or 1965. That wasn't that long ago in the Reagan years. In 1995, during the Clinton years, the budget expanded to $15 billion. Some people thought that was pretty outrageous. By 2005, we were in the Bush era. That's nationally. Of course, in the Governor Locke and Gregoire era, we were at $23 billion. And that's when I entered the legislature, which was 17 years ago now. We were at $23 billion. Just 10 years later, in 2015, we had reached $35 billion, and in 2020, we have a projected $53 billion budget. Now, to set that up for you, it took 116 years to get to $23 billion, and just 13 years to double that number to 46, and in 7 more years, it will triple, because the projection in 2025 is somewhere around $75 billion. Now, I also want to remind you, that is the state portion. That does not include the federal match. To get the total state spending budget, you'd have to double those numbers generally. So we're talking about budgets in the 140 to 150 billion zone in just a few years. Well, where did all this money, where's this $53 billion going to go? A 19% increase over the last budget. There is a huge amount of money. There is a $1.4 billion revenue package attached. We'll talk about that in a minute, but let's take a look at where some of this new money is going. While they did not do a lot of general money to K-12, which has been handled over the McCleary decision the last few years, there is a lot of money going back to K-12. There is $453 million in an increase to help with school employee health benefits, $77 million for local effort assistance, which is an equalization fund for smaller districts, and $69 million for special education alone. Now, that's an area that was underfunded and probably deserves that increase at $69 million. But $453 million for healthcare, we just tried to solve the healthcare situation and bring those costs under control. But not just K through 12 is getting that $600 million boost. That totals to $600 million. $483 million, now we're close to $500 million, to higher education. That's right. Higher education got a significant boost as well. So right there, you've got over $1 billion in additional spending between K through 12 higher education. Children, youth, and families picks up $560 million, another $500 million. Family Chair Collective Bargaining Agreement is $53 million. Rate increase for ECAP and others. Child Center rate increases and those things, again, come up to about $560 million. Healthcare. Now, this one has a very interesting point in it. There's $100 million more dollars put into healthcare because $80 million of it is to increase. It's an increase to restore the previously assumed savings that didn't materialize. In other words, they tried a bunch of new programs that they thought would save money in healthcare, and nothing they've done in healthcare has saved any money. But they tried this, none of it worked. There were 3 separate programs that were enacted several years ago to save money. None of them materialized, so now they're $80 million in the hole on healthcare. Behavioral health, this includes the mental health side of things that we've talked about being underfunded, has $424 million. Long-term care at $227 million. And other items, including state salaries. The salary increases for state employees and for higher ed employees adds up to $438 million, almost $500 million there. Natural Resources gets a $68 million boost, $53 million for self-insurance premiums, and $38 million for debt service alone. This adds up to another $650 million. Those are the major categories. Now, there are plenty more because that only adds up to $3 billion, and this increase is significantly more than that. But that gives you an idea where some of the biggies are. All right, let's take a look at the revenue side of things. $1.4 million projected in new revenue. Capital gains and real estate excise tax are the bulk of it. That's a really large capital gains tax. It's income tax. We don't think it'll pass muster. The RET tax, the REIT tax, is a graduated real estate tax. Both those together pull in between $900 and $1 billion. That's the big part of it. The business and occupation increase on small businesses would be significant, somewhere between $60 and $80 million. That is not going to set well with small business people who already pay the bulk of the general fund. Over 50% of taxes in this state are paid by business. That's extremely high compared to the national average. We have a number of other taxes that brings it up to $1.4 billion in new revenue. We'll see if those last. I tend to think they will not because of the significant revenue increase already. So there you have it, a little bit of an overview of the budget. We'll come back and talk to our legislators and see what they think of all this when we return to the 12th District. All right, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. We have been talking about the budget, breaking down some of it, but let's get right to our legislators in Olympia. Mike Steele, Keith Gaynor, great to have you aboard. It's quite a big week in Olympia with the first budget dropping, second budget on the way from the Senate anytime now. Tell us about your week.
Well, we've certainly been busy. We've introduced the House capital budget, of course, and very excited about the work that both Representative Gaynor and I did in that budget to get projects around the district funded. $54 million in our proposal to the 12th legislative district. So no small number, and a lot of great projects being accomplished inside that big dollar amount. And of course, appropriations has also been heard now, and we've exected out of our committee. Very late nights, as you can imagine, Carrie. You remember these. As we work to get everything that we had as priorities funded, we have to amend the budget in committee, so it takes hours and hours of conversation. But got some good things done in that process as well, and they accepted several of my amendments for things back home, including the child care advocacy centers like SAGE, and some work we're doing with DFW as well. So I was pleased that they were willing to accept some of those.
All right, Keith, how about your week?
Well, it was another busy week, too. I mean, we did approve the transportation budget. It came out of committee. And, it seemed like at least the reports that we got for those people that were negotiating that budget, it was a real bipartisan effort. And, there are things in there, of course, we would like to have seen a little bit different. But, you have to give and take. And we felt that the budget that was produced is really a reasonable one. And there's still some things, preservation is always uppermost in everyone's mind, as far as relating transportation, and we certainly need more money in that area. But the way the budget came out, it doesn't have any additional revenue, any taxes associated with it, and we've got some real challenges with the ferry system. I mean, that's one of the biggest ticket items in the budget. And yet, we're trying to, make some fixes and be, systematic in how we improve that.
Now, that's a key thing. You said there's no revenue in this budget. I assume that the budget that comes out of the Senate, it's been talked about for some time, would potentially have a revenue stream of some sort or multiple revenue streams. Is that what you're hearing?
That's what we're hearing. I mean, and that'll be a fundamental difference in the initial negotiations is, do we need to, narrow the gap between the two? Can the House, convince the Senate that we really don't need more gas taxes? I mean, there's certainly plenty of opportunities, and they're finding ways to, tax the gas more and any, anything that they can, basically, that is associated with transportation, trying to find ways to generate more revenue. But those are for things that, quite honestly, that, from the House side, again, we didn't feel like it was necessary to do that.
I have to ask you one question on that transportation budget, just because of the initiative that's hanging out there. I noticed the tabs looked like they went up again on this particular package, and we don't know what the Senate's doing yet, but is there anybody talking about that $30 tabs initiative and what that could mean if it passed this fall?
Well, we haven't had any, at least I haven't been aware of any real, significant conversations, I mean, in quantifying what the impact would be. But obviously, if you are planning on revenue that all of a sudden dries up, I mean, that's going to have a major impact on your budget.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, Mike, back to capital for a minute. You said there was some differences. The Senate actually came out a little early on the capital budget, and you got some potential differences there.
We do. We have some very, very wide differences, actually, and it'll be interesting what that means to negotiations moving forward. Just one, sort of stark difference is, we have twice the number of people in the House, and we spent about $30 million less on community projects. So that's kind of interesting. And I believe, since I was working on member projects across the state, I really worked to make them fair, and we funded a whole heck of a lot. In the Senate, you'll see that most of the senators picked just one big project, and that was it, leaving out the rest of their districts. So we've got some negotiating to do there. We had put a real big emphasis in our budget in the House on mental and behavioral health. The Senate funded it about $200 million less. They also took out the Speaker's new hospital that we had funded in our budget. And, we think that is the wrong move. We think that we need to be investing more in mental and behavioral health, and our budget was reflective of that. So we'll be seeing what that looks like. WWRP had additional dollars in the Senate. And of course, there are a lot of folks in the 12th district that are excited about that. But we've got, again, a wide range there to negotiate. And I don't know where that leaves us. And I think it could, potentially put a wrinkle in the timeline as far as getting out on time.
Uh-oh. Yeah, we don't want to hear that right now with 30 days to go. Are the projects, as far as the projects you included on your side, were all those projects inclusive in the Senate, or was there a different, and I'm speaking specifically of the 12th district?
The 12th district, no. In my budget, why I funded Wenatchee Landing, Representative Gaynor had a request to fund, and we funded the TWISP Community Center. We funded several small projects in and around Wenatchee and Chelan and Manson. We did some work in Pateros for some housing. We did a whole lot. We did a new library in Winthrop. Some of the key. So these are some of the bigger ones. There's a whole lot of little money in a bunch of buckets, but those are some of the big ones. The only thing funded in the Senate budget was the Wenatchee Landing project. So obviously, I've got a lot of work to do, and I want to make sure that I get the rest of my those projects the money that I had hoped to deliver to them.
Boy, I guess. That is quite a difference, a stark difference, and I hope that doesn't hold you up. But there may be something that will hold you up, and that is the operating budget. Let's get down to the big kahuna here. It's got 4 different new revenue streams in it to the tune of $1.4 billion, some which would be very hard on business, particularly the B&O tax. I'm hearing it from folks already. What do you think about this overall $52.8 billion, and are those revenue lines going to stick?
Well, from just someone that just coming in and not having a history of where, the commitments have been made, because some of those commitments are part of that increased spending because of, past obligations, now they have to be funded. And it's not much fun to just pay from what you committed last time, because you're wanting to create new things, evidently. I mean, that's the way the budget shakes out. But, it's going to be, I felt like we had enough revenue to fund the core priorities of government, of the state. And yet, we're expanding beyond that. And as, Mike has just said, I mean, some of the things that needed to be funded are being neglected. I mean, we still have a number of things that we had constituents talking to us about, things that seemed very reasonable to fund. And I'm thinking primarily of like the couple of retirement systems that, don't have any COLAs in them. I mean, they were glossed over. The counties, when we talked about the indigent defense, I mean, there were things moving along through the course of conversation. It seemed like, okay, we understand we need to fund the state's responsibilities, and yet at the end of the day, now when the budget drops, it's gone. It's not there. And we've got some other projects in the district that have had some assistance in the past. They were given the assurance that it would still be there. But then, that it's in the Department of Ecology now, that budget is been curtailed. So, there's a lot of things. I'm sure there'll be a lot of moving parts going forward. But getting back to your initial question, there was plenty of revenue here to fund what we needed to fund without additional revenue streams.
Well, come on, guys. You're telling me there's a lot of things missing with a 19% increase and a $1.4 billion tax increase, and we're still not getting things. I find that hard to believe, but I did look through the budget, and I tend to think you're correct. The priorities seem a little wrong to me. I noticed, Mike, that they did leave, and I think this is the hedge. They did leave a pretty substantial amount of money in the rainy day fund on this first proposal. Do you think that's kind of a hedge if they can't move those revenue bills to fall back on?
Well, I'm hoping so. I mean, I think that, those are, again, as Representative Gaynor mentioned, we took a pretty holistic view of this budget and said, okay, look, what can we do? What levers can we turn that are going to generate additional revenue above and beyond what we already had, due to the healthy economy? And we had a additional budget capacity without new revenues, without new taxes, of about $3 to $6 billion more that we could have just used our tools at our disposal to increase debt capacity. So that right there was enough to do all of the things that they had hoped to do and more around mental and behavioral health, the southern resident orca population, salmon recovery. We had a whole slew of things that we could fund without raising revenues that were important to a whole lot of folks across the state, including members on the other side of the aisle. So why we're here talking about, the potential for a capital gains tax and a REIT adjustment, where I have serious concerns around the capital gains tax, of whether or not it's either going to be ruled constitutional. They're probably, we're going to be seeing some lawsuits, I imagine. So I don't know if that's the best way to create a budget on the hope that you can convince the judicial system to move a new tax.
Well, I think they've run this thing up the pole a lot of times and it has failed, and I tend to think this buffer they've left in there is on purpose, but it's still a significant increase, a 19% increase, a $53 billion budget. Just to remind folks, when I came in, it was $23 billion, more than doubled in just not that many years. So we'll see, I guess, when we see the Senate comparison, whether they go higher, lower, or what they do with revenue. That's going to be pretty exciting. We'll talk about that next week. Is there anything in terms of policy floating out there that's still a concern that you're seeing moving through the system?
We're still moving some bills. We're about done with my policy committee, which is education. We've got a few more bills to move. Most likely the last set will be Monday, around some rural needs that we're seeing in the 7th legislative district and the 13th legislative district. So we'll be addressing some of those things on Monday. But other than that, from my policy perspective, that's wrapping up here pretty quick.
Actually, we have a couple things that are probably hanging out there. One that I consider to be a little bit of a negative, and that's the accessory dwelling unit and bill that would impose certain zonings on cities and counties. And that, to me, is not positive where it is right now. But on the positive side, we have some contracting bills that would allow for local government to be more efficient and cost effective in the bid process. So there are some positive things that are still, could possibly become law yet that would be of assistance to local governments.
Moving back to the counties for just a moment, we're almost out of time, gentlemen, but did you see any give from the state to the counties in terms of this funding situation? You said indigent defense did not get funded. Is there any relief to the counties that are struggling?
Not that I can see. The marijuana money that we had hoped to, divert a little more of that toward the counties didn't materialize.
We ran an amendment actually last night, Carrie, on the marijuana money, increasing the dollar amount from 15 million back to local counties to up to 20 million, and it was flatly denied. It was just a real challenge because, as you're aware, that was the guarantee that that was the money, the amount of money we had promised these counties to begin with, and we can't even seem to hold up to that to the end of that bargain. So,
boy, I can remember that fight, Mike. I can tell you, we've worked on that for years. And Keith, it's got to be tough for you coming out of the county situation to see this, and I'm glad you are seeing it because we talked about it for several years, and we tried our best to change that situation, but it just seems like it's moving a big rock up a big hill. All right, last minute, folks. Any wrap-up before we head out? Next week we'll have both budgets on the table. We'll get a little better feel for the operating budget. And, interesting to see what transportation does, if they really bring this 6-cent gas tax forward or not on top of everything else. Last comments.
Hey, I'm sure you'd be interested in this. I actually am getting a hearing on my fuel tax transparency bill, which was good enough to go back. So we'll have a hearing on that next week.
I sent him an email and asked for his reasoning for not moving that forward, and I have not yet received a response. I was not surprised. Mike, last comment?
Yeah, just, it'll be very interesting as we start these budget negotiations now across the rotunda with the Senate to see how we fill these gaps and what materializes. So I look forward to the update next week.
And by the way, you guys had a terrific town meeting. I did attend that here in town a week or so ago, and I thought it went very smoothly. And, it was very peaceful.
Really well attended. We really appreciate all the folks that showed up to ask questions. We got through as many questions as we could. We got through a ton, so really grateful.
I thought it went really well. In general, we don't see that kind of turnout, so that's great. All right, guys, get back to work. You got a lot to do, and I will see you next week, and we'll put this all together and see where we're at.
All right, thanks, Gary.
All right. All right, there you have it, right from your legislators. We are right down to the meat of this session. It is coming together, and by next week's show, we should be able to tell you specifically where those budgets stand. We'll be right back to wrap it up on the 12th District. Well, that's it for this week, folks. Your legislators will be back next week with all the other side, the Senate budgets, and we'll talk about the comparison there and see if they're going to get out on time. And if you're going to take another hit in your pocketbook, that is the most important thing right now, is to see if that revenue sticks. I don't think it will, personally. There may be some. The transportation budget will also be unleashed to see if we have a gas tax. Lots to show you next week, so stick around. This is the 12th District. I'm Kerry Condata reporting for NCW Life TV. We'll see you next week.